Chapter 1. Original Sin. American Slavery, American Freedom. Origins matter. Every nation-state has an origin myth, a comforting tale of trials, tribulations, and triumphs that form the foundation of imagined communities. The United States of America, a self-proclaimed indispensable nation, is as prone to exaggerated origin myths as any society in human history. Most of us are familiar with the popular American origin story. Our forefathers, a collection of hardy, pious pioneers, escaped religious persecution in England and founded a new world, a shining beacon in a virgin land. Of course, that story, however flawed, refers to the Pilgrims and Massachusetts, circa 1620. But that's not the true starting point for English-speaking society in North America. The first permanent colony was in Virginia, at Jamestown, beginning in 1607. Why, then, do our young students dress in black buckle-top hats and recreate Thanksgiving each year? Where is the commemoration of Jamestown and our earliest American forebears? The omission itself tells a story, that of a chosen, comforting narrative, the legend of the Pilgrims, and the whitewashing of a murkier past along the James River. The truth is, the United States descends from both origin points, Massachusetts and Virginia, and carries the legacy of each into the 21st century. So why do we focus on the Pilgrims and sideline Virginia? A fresh look may help explain. The Age of Discovery. When it comes to history, like any story, the starting point is itself informative. The cadets to whom I taught the freshman history at West Point were required to take only one semester of U.S. history. So where to start? The official answer, as in so many standard history courses, was Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. That, of course, is a fascinating, perhaps absurd, choice. Such a starting point omits several thousand years of Native American history, of varied, complex civilizations from modern Canada to Chile. Time being short, 1607 remains a common pedagogical starting point. As a result, from the beginning, our understanding of U.S. history is Eurocentric and narrow, covering only the last 400 or so years. Consider that problem number one. Next, contemplate the language we use to describe the founding of new European colonies. This is, say it with me, the Age of Discovery. In 1492, Columbus discovered, even though he wasn't first, America. Now that's a loaded term. Isn't it just as accurate to say that Native Americans discovered Columbus, a lost and confused soul, when he landed upon their shores? When we say Europeans discovered the New World, we are, not inadvertently, implying that there was nothing substantial going on in the Americas until the Caucasians showed up. Europe has a dated, chronological history reaching back at least to the ancient Greeks, which most students learn in elementary school and later on in Western civilization classes. Not so for the Native Americans. Their public history starts in 1492, or for Americans in 1607, what came before then hardly matters. Inauspicious beginnings. Englishmen came neither to escape religious persecution nor to found a New Jerusalem. Not to Virginia, at least. No, the corporate-backed expedition by the Virginia Company, a joint stock venture, sought treasure, think gold, to find a northwest passage to India and to balance the rival Catholic Spaniards. But first and foremost, they pursued profit. The expedition barely survived. That should come as little surprise. They chose a malarial swamp for a home. The first ships carried mostly aristocrats, gentlemen, as they were then labeled, with a few laborers and carpenters for good measure. Gentlemen didn't work or deal with the dirty business of farming and settling, but they did like to argue, and there were too many chiefs on this voyage. The first party did not include any farmers or women. Only 30% survived the first winter. 2 years later, only 60 out of 500 colonists survived the starving time. Over the first 17 years, 6,000 people arrived, but only 1,200 were alive in 1624. One guy ate his wife. So why the disaster? Why the poor site selection and early starvation? First, the colonists had chosen a site inland on the James River because they had feared detection by the more powerful Spanish. But mainly the disaster came down to colonial motivations. Jamestown was initially about profit, not settlement. Corporate dividends, not community. This was the private sector, not a permanent national venture. In that sense, matters in early Virginia were not unlike modern American economics. Saved by tobacco, the first drug economy. They never did find much gold or, for that matter, a Northwest Passage. Then again, they didn't all starve to death. Rather, the venture was saved by a different sort of gold, the cash crop of tobacco. Tobacco changed the entire dynamic of colonization and control in North America. Finally, there was money to be made. The Englishmen shipped the newest vice eastward and pulled a handsome profit in return. Our beloved forefathers were early drug dealers. More migrants now crossed the Atlantic to get in on the tobacco windfall. The plentiful gentlemen of Virginia sought to recreate their landed estates in England. Despite significant early conflict with the native Powhatan Confederacy, large tobacco plantations eventually developed along the coast. Who, though, would work these fields? Certainly not the landowners. The burgeoning aristocracy had two choices: lower-class English or Scots-Irish indentured servants, who worked for a fixed period in the promise of future acres, and African slaves. Whom to choose? Unsurprisingly, ethics played little role, and the cost was the defining factor. When mortality was high in the colony's early years, plantation owners favored the cheaper, mainly white, indentured servants. But as more families planted corn, kept cattle, and improved nutrition, death rates fell and slaves became more appealing. After all, though expensive in upfront costs, slaves worked for life, and the slave owners got to keep their offspring. Nevertheless, for the first several decades, an interracial mix of slaves and servants worked the land in Virginia. Bacon's Rebellion and the American Future. The problem with the tobacco economy was one of space. To be profitable, cash crops require expansive acreage, and in Virginia, this meant movement inland. This expansion set the Englishmen on a collision course with local Native Americans. Furthermore, what was plantation society to do about those indentured servants who survived and matriculated? Land would have to be found somewhere, though not near the coasts and early settlements. The gentlemen weren't about to divide up their own large estates. In order to maintain their chosen societal model, landed aristocracy, in which the wealthiest 10% possessed half the wealth and the bottom 60% held less than 10% of accumulated wealth, new land would have to be found farther west in Indian territory. The thing is, after some bloody early wars with the Powhatan, most gentlemen preferred a stable, secure status quo, not another war. That'd be bad for business. However, falling tobacco prices, increased competition from nearby colonies, and the relentless search by the former indentured class for more land brought frontier Virginians into conflict with an easy scapegoat, nearby Native Americans. Frustrated lower-class men, both white and black, rallied behind a young, discontented aristocrat, a firebrand named Nathaniel Bacon. Bacon led his interracial Poor People's Army in attacks on local natives and, eventually, on Governor William Berkeley and the establishment gentlemen. In 1675 and 1676, Bacon's throng destroyed plantations and even burned Jamestown before Bacon died of disease, the bloody flux, and the rebellion petered out. Bacon's rebellion was one of the foundational and most misunderstood events in American history. Here, a populist army savagely assaulted hated Native Americans and aristocrats alike. A mix of black and white former indentured servants demonstrated the fragility of Virginian society. The planter class was terrified. In order to avoid, at all costs, a repeat, the landed gentry made a devil's bargain. To ensure stability, they realized they must co-opt some of the poor without ceding their own privileged status. Enter America's original sins: racism and white privilege. Plantation owners simply hired fewer indentured servants and became more reliant on black African chattel slaves for their labor force. The planters also threw a bone to the middling whites, lowering some taxes and allowing more political representation for white male Virginians. The implications were as disturbing as they were enduring. White unity became the organizing principle of life in colonial Virginia. To be fair, poor whites lived difficult lives and always outnumbered their aristocratic betters. Nonetheless, these lower-class Caucasians benefited from the new racialized social system. Pale skin became a badge of honor. Life may not be optimal, but at least we are white. Black free men became a thing of the past, and soon, blackness became inseparably associated with slavery and the lowest of social classes. Black skin became a brand of slavery, and runaways could no longer blend into colonial society. Slaves were easily spotted by virtue of their color. Bacon's rebellion linked land, labor, and race together in nefarious ways. Land ownership remained the path to freedom. Labor remained essential to profiting from the land, and race came to define the relationship between land and labor. After 1676, a class-based system morphed into a race-based system of labor and social structure. The demand for African slaves rose, and a triangular trade developed among North America, Africa, and Europe. It seemed everyone benefited from slave labor. It became an Atlantic system. The American South had transformed from a society with slaves into a slave society. It would remain so for nearly 2 centuries. Race became a prevalent fact of life in the Americas, and it still is, more than 300 years later. There's nothing simple about America's origins, and it is good that this is so. In this way, the United States is like most other modern nation-states. Leaving behind exceptionalist rhetoric and exploring uncomfortable truths signify intellectual maturity. Should this country wish to move forward, be its best self, and fulfill the dream of its finest rhetoric, then the citizenry must dispense with reassuring myths and grapple with inconvenient truths. What, then, do Jamestown and early Virginia have to tell us in the 21st century? Perhaps this: American slavery arose alongside and intertwined with American freedom. Our society descends from a sinister original sin, the development of a race-based caste system along the banks of the James River. Race, class, labor, and slavery were inextricably linked in our colonial past. They remain so today.